Did you know that an early Lean Six Sigma thinkers were the inspiration for cheaper by the dozen? Or that a former Waymo CEO first coined the term lean? In this week's session we are delving deep into the history of continuous improvement. Not just of the important events in Lean Six Sigma but putting them against the historical events of the time. I am Amanda Zimmerman and this is my weekly series, Unstuck, where we are focused on helping your CI team win instead of spin. Unfortunately, I lost my voice this week. So I am using a voiceover. Thank goodness for modern technology. Before we delve into the history, I want to just come back to last week's topic on continuous improvement versus continual improvement. This week I read Toyota Kata by Mike Rother. Don't worry, it is on audiobook too, so I encourage you to check it out. In Toyota Kata, Rother talks about the difference between continuous and continual improvement. Remember, in continual improvement we discussed how there is a stop and start to our improvements. For example, in Six Sigma DMAIC projects, they may take 3 to 6 months, and in each iteration there is value creation, realignment, and then starting again. In PDSA or A3 maybe the cycle is weeks or months. But it still has that start and stop. Like the picture of steps, we make improvements with one step up the stairs at a time. We think that adopting lean tools means we automatically will see the gains that Toyota has, but that hasn't been the case. Rother explores this further. He puts forward that this is because there is a practice, a kata, at Toyota that doesn't get translated across when we adopt lean. This aligns with Shigeo Shingo's quote, "Lean is a way of thinking, not a list of things to do." By adopting this practice, this way of thinking, we are able to make those iterations, those stops and starts as small as possible. Each individual within the organization develops this mindset so that when they come against a problem they can immediately apply this improvement thinking. This is really important to understand. Because when our continuous improvement teams are taking on improvement work, there is a whole ecosystem of support required. It isn't a project management implementation, it is an improvement ecosystem that is built. After reading Rother, it isn't about continuous versus continual improvement, it is about striving for continuous improvement by making the continual iterations of improvement as small as possible. Today we are going to do a high-level look at the historical development of continuous improvement. But not just continuous improvement, because it didn't happen in a fishbowl. The development was influenced and impacted by the changing and dynamic world around it. From the changes to the means of production, new technology, workers' rights, world wars, the complexity of our processes, and a necessity to make more at a lower price. There is a dynamic world that influenced how these tools developed. I did my best to look at the wider historical context, but as we review this list of events, you'll notice this is very America-centered. In the United States we've documented and taken credit for these innovations. However, it likely leaves out a lot of the other players, including women, minorities, indigenous peoples, and almost everyone outside of the United States. Another thing to note is while I wouldn't explain the history this way to a group of new green belts, this is a fantastic overview of the history for someone teaching the concepts. It will help you to build connections between events and people that may seem quite disparate. As we evaluate continuous improvement, where it is today, and most importantly where we think it could be in the future, I think it is important to look back to the Industrial Revolution. A time that transformed the world, that transformed businesses and work. The impact of which led to a population explosion that meant we needed to make more. We were seeing demand increase by the thousands and millions. As far back as 1785, just after the end of the American Revolution, Oliver Evans automated processes through the use of conveyors and mechanical devices. Portsmouth Block Mills is built between 1801 and 1803 with one of the first examples of a linear and continuous assembly process. At the same time work is changing, we see women in the US start to form associations, eventually what will become unions. We see Karl Marx share his thoughts about the means of production. In the 1850s, Richard Garrett and Sons created the long shop in England. where they were able to manufacture portable steam engines through an assembly line. What we can observe is that people are attacking this problem similarly, by creating early examples of the assembly line. Then the American Civil War breaks out. Frederick Winslow Taylor, who we will talk about quite a bit, was 9 at the end of the war. Henry Ford was born before the war ended. Western Electric, a predecessor to Bell Labs, is founded in 1869. This post-war America begins to descend into a place where unions are forming to stand against monopolies and exploitation. Things were changing. Work was changing. And that is exactly the world that Taylor and the Gilbreths would have seen and experienced. In 1901, Ransom Olds patents his assembly line. Right behind him is the founding of Ford Motor Company in 1903, with the subsequent development and full product of the assembly line, as we think of it today, from Ford in 1913. Taylor starts his career at Western Electric and publishes one of his best-known works in 1911. In the 1920s, when Bell Labs starts, he will become a central figure of their success. The Gilbreths, Frank and Lillian, are a couple known for their work with time and motion studies. They were also the inspiration for the movie Cheaper by the Dozen. With 12 children, you can bet time and motion studies were needed to keep their home running like clockwork. In 1914, we can see a split in the work the Gilbreths did from Taylor, as each had a different perspective on the attitudes of workers. The Gilbreths were in a position to need to argue contrary to the trade unionists. The Titanic sinks just a year after Taylor's Principles of Scientific Management. A 12-year-old W. Edwards Deming must have heard or seen the reports. From 1914 to 1918, the world is in the chaos of war and a global pandemic. But we start to see a changing of the guards for our continuous improvement founders. Taylor passes away in 1815 and Shewhart seems to pick up where he left off. Shewhart has an incredible breadth of work and would eventually be a huge part of W. Edwards Deming achievements. In 1924, Shewhart introduces Statistical Process Control, or SPC. Frank Gilbreth passes away the same year, but Lillian will live until 1972. In 1925, Shewhart introduces PDCA, or Foundational System of Structured Problem Solving and Improvement. Bell Laboratories officially is founded the same year and becomes an idea factory. That is also the name of a book by John Gertner that explores this time period. I'll be reading it over the next few weeks and hope we can continue this discussion about what made Bell Labs such an incredible incubator of thinkers and innovators. From 1929 to 1939, the Depression takes its toll. Shewhart continues his work. He publishes his groundbreaking work, Economic Control of Quality of Manufactured Product. The work details his application of SPC on manufacturing processes. And time keeps rolling on, but big changes are on their way. World War II seems to kick off just about the same time Deming is coming fully into his own. Learning and growing from Shewhart's work, he has taken on SPC and builds upon it. During the war, Deming begins building the foundations of Total Quality Management, or TQM. He had the opportunity to teach short courses for the military, and once the war was over, General MacArthur invited Deming to Japan. Post-war created a flood of events we reference tirelessly in continuous improvement. The creation of the American Society of Quality, or ASQ, in 1946. Bringing together 17 different quality-related societies with 253 initial members. In London, the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, was founded in 1946 when delegates from 25 countries gathered to discuss standardization. In 1946, JUSE is founded. The Union of Japanese Scientists and Engineers, or JUSE, plays a critical role in Deming's ability to support Japanese industry. He has the opportunity, through General MacArthur's invite, to train hundreds of Japan's engineers. These connections, along with the ability to encounter challenges and see them as opportunities, allowed Deming to contribute a prolific amount of work and knowledge along with Toyota's own thinkers. The Toyota Production System or TPS and Deming's 14 points are already shaping up in the late 1940s. But Deming isn't the only thinker out there. Joseph Uron also is working and developing his own methodologies, with a large and consistent focus on quality. In 1951 we see two incredible pieces of work from Joseph Uron and Armand Feigenbaum. I had not previously heard of Feigenbaum, but he pushed a focus on customer satisfaction, considered quality a company-wide responsibility, and developed the concept of the hidden plant or factory. Toyota in the 1950s and 1960s continued to their methodologies and add tools. In 1963 John F. Kennedy was assassinated and the Equal Pay Act was passed in the U.S. to give women more rights towards equality in the workplace. But the U.S. had a problem. They just couldn't compete with factories like the ones in Japan, especially in the automobile industry. If you've been in the industry a couple years, you may wonder why so many automobile engineers have stories of attending one of Deming's workshops. And this is why. America couldn't compete. Japan was kicking their butt. At the same time Deming was getting ready to retire. He was continuing to publish books and share information, but it wasn't like in the war where there was the urgency. Well, not for him. In 1980 he was a central part of an NBC special called, If Japan Can, Why Can't We? It is actually on YouTube and I'll drop the link in the description. This documentary challenged the way Americans thought about productivity and created a rush of interest in Deming. The same year Deming published Out of the Crisis. Deming was the guy. He was the go-to guy for all the factories in the US that couldn't figure out why they were falling behind. And for a very hefty fee Deming shared his knowledge, spreading total quality management or TQM from sea to shining sea. The Goal was published in 1984 as well, and as most of us know, that is a book that seems to have a universal appeal. Taking these concepts and putting them in layman's terms. But that wasn't the end of growth in continuous improvement. It was just the foundation for what was growing out of the quality and statistical analysis spaces. In 1986 Bill Smith from Motorola coined the term Six Sigma. In the same year Masaaki Imai published Kaizen, the key to Japan's competitive success. One of the most surprising things I learned in my research this week was that a former Waymo CEO coined the term lean, and not until 1988. This may not make sense in your mind if you are an English speaker. We've been discussing the development of lean since the end of World War II. What was developed in Japan was for a Japanese audience. It isn't until English speakers took this information and shared it with other English speakers that we decided what the English translation would be. In 1988 John Krafcik referenced Toyota's lean production system in his MIT thesis. And boy did it stick. While lean was almost a methodology before we had the English terms for what we call it today, Six Sigma had the term or tool before it was a methodology. Depending which story you want to follow, there are different stories about how Six Sigma fully developed. According to Mikkel Harry, he was the missing piece to develop and grow Bill Smith's work into a full program. Harry created the belt system as we know it today. The first belt was certified around 1988. Then we come to more recent history. At least history I have been on the planet to see and experience myself. What really stands out is to see how many amazing thinkers we've lost in the last 40 years. I wonder what names of the current movers and shakers you'd add to this list. Whose tools and methods will live on for someone else to talk about in 50 years? Well, that is exactly why we are here. To explore that question and understand what we think the future may hold. In 1990, one of my favorite books, The Machine That Changed the World, was published and fully popularized lean manufacturing principles. In the early 1990s we lost both Deming and Bill Smith. We see thinkers like Mike Rother picking up and developing upon the works of all these previous thinkers through his works like Learning to See. These are so pricey on Amazon, but some of the best books to explain pull, flow, and value stream mapping. In 2000 we entered a new era of the fourth industrial revolution. This was also the year I graduated high school. So everything forward I consider recent, and it blows my mind how much has happened in just those 24 years. The Agile Manifesto, Apply Lean to Software Design, was published in 2001. The Toyota Way, one of my Lean Bibles, was published in 2004. Toyota Kata, which I mentioned when I discussed continual improvement, was published in 2009. I had no idea this book was so over 10 years old. I thought it was so recent. It has taken 15 years, but the Kata movement is growing and significant. We started to see more protests and attention given to the challenges to capitalism in 2011 with Occupy Wall Street. Eric Ries brought us Lean Startup and created a whole additional group of people passionate about Lean. I think it is fair to say one piece missing here is the expansion of Lean outside of manufacturing. The adoption and application has exploded. Between Agile, Lean Startup, and works like Toyota Kata, we are creating an environment where we just talk about applying the tools to work, not applying them to manufacturing. And that brings us back to today. If you've made it through this, then you are a die-hard history buff like me. Congrats, I'll buy you a coffee next time I see you and we can ramble about obscure facts. If you want to share what wasn't quite right or what should be added to the list, please do so in the comments. I really love hearing your actual experience, not what the history books recorded. Since this week's episode was so big, it counts for 2 weeks of episodes. Hopefully my voice will return by then and we can talk more about exploring this idea factory and this divide between the perspectives of Gilbreth and Taylor. So much fascinating stuff here. Big thanks to Mona Muggenthaler, who helped inspire me this week with a fun collaboration session, to Brian Hurley for always staying connected and supported, and Carolina Cabrera for keeping me accountable. If you are in the Portland or Seattle area, reach out. I'd love to connect in a few weeks when I am there. Have a wonderful day and happy improving.